Hello, welcome back to another video. This one's going to take on a slightly different format, so you'll have seen that my video skills leave a bit to be desired, and it didn't record this game, so I'm going to go through it after the fact now and kind of post-commentate on it, and kind of should be a bit quicker getting through it. So in this game I was playing basically 1700 rated player, and I had the black pieces. And we started with the kind of standard e4, and my reply with e5 to it. We had knight f3, and I've been playing the Petrov, so knight f6. Played more of a main line. They took on e5, so this is all pretty standard stuff. And the reply is d6, so this is all following mainline theory. Knight goes back to f3, which allows me to then take in the middle with my knight on e4. Then bishop came out to c4. I don't know if this is really what you want to be doing, because it gives me the tempo on d5, which I took to kick the bishop away, and bishop went back to d3. So here I was trying to think about what I wanted to do next. I mean, I had options of getting the bishop out. I could maybe put the bishop on this diagonal as well. I think getting the dark squared bishop out on this diagonal was preferable, but it runs into d4, so I didn't really want to do that. And I know in a lot of lines after white castles, this rook comes to the e file and puts a lot of pressure on it. So it was quite likely I was going to need to either put my bishop on e7 or the light squared one on e6. So I just need to decide which one was going to develop and which one was going to be a bit more of a blocker. So I was thinking I was going to use the dark squared bishop to go here and develop the light squared one out either to f5 or g4. And then the last thing I needed to figure out was what goes on to c6. Do I play pawn c6 to have this pawn structure, or do I put a knight on c6? But to start with, I think I was going to decide to put my dark squared bishop on e7 and therefore develop my light squared bishop out. So I played bishop g4, and opponent played d4 in response. So now again I was thinking, need to get my last couple of pieces out and develop, and then decide what's going on c6. So the move order I went for was played c6 here first, just to secure up this pawn, and I also had some ideas about now maybe developing my queen, whether it was coming out this side or even to the king side. Opponent castled, and again I was expecting now the rook to come over and start putting some pressure on here, but I thought it was interesting is this pin on the knight, and the fact it can't really move, and the only way to apply an extra defender is to play the knight out here and block with the bishop. So that's why I started to consider queen to f6 to apply a bit of extra pressure here, some pressure on the pawn, and see if we could uncover some weaknesses. So queen f6 I played first, and it also allows me to cover with the bishop there afterwards. And I didn't think I was going to get into any trouble of my queen getting trapped. It still had plenty of squares. The only piece that can really attack me would be the knight, and given that that's pinned, it wasn't going to be an immediate threat. So rook e1 was played, and then bishop e7 is the likely candidate move. The only thing I was trying to calculate in some of these lines is what happens if the bishop comes to g5, but I thought I was fine with either bishop takes knight first, so we pick up a knight for a queen, so we're up a piece in that line, and then if they take back, we pick up here, so we win a piece in that line. So I thought I was fine to play bishop e7, which I did, covering the pin. They develop now in knight c3, and again I was trying to calculate different lines here. Do I take the knight off first, double the pawns? I then got the option of doubling pawns up here, either before or after a queen trade. I was slightly nervous that this pin would become a bit uncomfortable, and even if I do get the double pawn structure, it's difficult to exploit without a queen on the board. But I decided to take the knight on c3 first, to take those double pawns, mostly because it was difficult to keep my knight on e4. So I think trading off and doubling their pawns seemed logical. And now again, I had the option of doubling here, but I didn't think I'd have as many winning chances with the queens off the board, so wanted to keep them on there and instead went for castles. And after my opponent's next move of bishop g5, I realised I probably should have spent more time thinking about this position. So when I had a knight on e4, this pin and this tactic didn't really work. But when I was sat here, I was thinking, oh, I think I've thrown away some material here. So the lines I was trying to calculate were, if bishop takes knight, so I'm up a knight, down a queen, I get the queen back, so I'm up a knight in that line. But when he takes on the bishop here, we've got level material. He'll be threatening my rook on f8 and threatening my bishop on d1, so I'll be losing a full piece in that line. So I don't think bishop takes knight worked. If I move my queen anywhere, this bishop is hanging, so that doesn't work. So the only other option is queen take bishop. So we're up a bishop, down a queen, take the queen back, so we're up a bishop again, and then rook takes on e7. So it'll be level on material, but in this line, rather than having a bishop and a rook hanging, I've got a bishop that ends up on d1, which is hanging because of this rook, and my b7 pawn. So there were the options I had: either lose a bishop, lose either a bishop and a rook, or the final line that I think I was forced to go into, which will lead me down either a bishop or a pawn. So I kind of knew at the end of this line I'd be losing a b7 pawn, but I thought that was the best of the options that I had, given I didn't really think it through correctly at the time. So we go into queen takes g5, and then I think a lot of this line is now forced. So knight takes queen, bishop takes queen. He's got an option, I suppose, here of which one to take, but if you take here, then you drop your knight here, and you're down the piece. So it's got to be rook takes e7, and this is the position I was trying to have in my head here. So it's pretty poor position for me now. Like I say, I've got a hanging rook and a hanging pawn, but it's probably a bit worse than that because this pawn is at the base of the chain. He's got a rook on the 7th, which is going to be applying pressure for the whole game. My f7 pawn's tied down because it's being attacked twice from the knight and the rook, which is tying down my king and rook. And I've got a knight that can't really develop so easily. So I thought even when I move my bishop, I'm going to lose this pawn. My knight can't develop there. My knight can't develop there, so it's forced to go here. And then this c6 pawn is going to be really weak with these bishop moves, and even the rook coming back to attack it. So I thought I was in quite a bit of trouble here. I knew I had to move my bishop. Well, the candidate moves were either attacking the knight or moving the bishop. But I was thinking, if I attack the knight and he trades, I end up with a pawn on g5, which I don't really want, and I lose this pawn at the end. So we've traded another set of minor pieces, and I've misplaced my pawn. So I was thinking, I need to keep pieces on the board and retreat my bishop. So I go back to g4, and then I was only really looking at rook takes on b7 because I thought that's got to be the right move. But he played c4, and that kind of gives me a tempo to try and sort out a bit of my problems. So I've got the option of trading here and winning a tempo. I've also got the option of trying to kick the knight with one of these moves. So I went with h6 to kick the knight back first to relieve some pressure on my f7 pawn, free up my bishop my rook to be able to move. So after h6, he drops back to h3, and then again to try and claim another tempo. If I trade here, then the bishop is staring at this pawn, but given that I've kicked the knight, there's no lasting pressure there, which is why the move order of playing h6 first was important. So I tried to gain another tempo and stop a pawn hanging on d5 by trading there. And now I've got time to try and defend my b7 pawn. So I played knight d7. And I was feeling a bit happier about this position than I was 5 moves ago when it was there to be taken. I've still got some long-term pressure that's going to be difficult to sort out. Again, neither of these pieces can move. This pawn is pinned, and then there's this rook can come, many different ways to join it. So I'm definitely worse, but not completely out of it just yet. Knight comes to f4 to start to develop. And then I was trying to think here what makes most sense to play. I was thinking like b6, but does that weaken my position a lot? And one thing I've got to be careful on in a lot of these lines is because of this pin. the knight's able to jump into g6, which I kind of was vaguely aware of, but there's definitely some positions where it works, and I kind of forget about it. I go with knight b6 first, attack the bishop, force it to move, and then I've kind of got this square to put it on later if I need it. So bishop drops back, and then I was trying to think, yeah, do I want to slide my rook over to b8 and kind of guard it there? But does that make me really passive, and what do I kind of do from this position? So if I put my rook there, that rook's not moving anymore. Neither of these pieces are moving because of the pawn. The knight doesn't have any decent squares. It can't go here, here, here. Doesn't make sense to drop it back. And putting it here drops a pawn, so my knight's pretty stuck. And my bishop can't go to any of these squares. It could go back to d7. So I'm kind of a bit stuck piecewise if I try to defend it passively. So instead went rook to d8 to put pressure on the pawn, which I thought was a nice counter-attacking option. I kind of realised after I played it that knight g6 is really strong here. Because of the pin, I can't take it. So I'm forced to move. If I'm forced to move my rook across, there's then bishop takes with check. I'm picking up the rook there. So I was again in real trouble if opponent found knight g6. Thankfully they didn't, and they played c3. That gives me again a tempo to play rook d7. I didn't know even in this position whether they should be taking the pawn here. Maybe not, because I suppose I tap the knight, don't I? So yes, they defend it, and that gives me a chance to try and trade off a set of rooks. They go back and kind of threaten this discovery line. I didn't really want to play bishop here because it gives him a tempo with rook e5, but I didn't really have many better squares of where to put my bishop, because if I put it here, it just loses a pawn, and there's nowhere else really to put it. And I suppose with one of these moves coming, I didn't really know where I should be putting it. I doubled up with this rook. I was thinking, yeah, if I do get attacked and I'm forced to go back on this diagonal, it's not the end of the world. And I thought having some kind of long-term pressure against here makes sense. Enables me to block with a knight. Maybe allows me to push the pawn, and there could be some back rank vulnerabilities. He doubles up his rooks, and again, kind of threatening the infiltration square. And at the point that we trade, I'd be forced over, and then his bishop could be coming in. So I took the time to play king f8, getting out of the pin and helping defend on this e8 square. It does allow for a trade with knight g6, so the check there, uncovering the rook against the bishop. I'm forced to take. He takes the bishop off. And again, in all of these positions, I'm just slightly worse and trying to fight for equality and trying to get back to normal. But this pawn's really difficult to defend. I'm in all kinds of bother if I don't act immediately. So this bishop is cutting off the light squares to my king. This rook is covering all the other squares. So all it needs is a rook back to f4, check, and the only thing I can do is block with my rook, get taken, and then that's easily the end of the game. So I need to either run my king out or block, and I think long term I need to be getting my knight in here, but I thought the first sensible move is g5, even though it can be attacked with either of these pawns, but I think that's what I've got to go for. So I start with g5, h4 played as expected, and again, if I can't take because I need to protect this f4 square, so that if I take and the rook moves over, I'm in this predicament again where my king can't move. So I'm going to have to lose the pawn there and just block with my knight. So now my king has at least got some squares it can try and run away to. He takes the pawn and goes up on material for the first time in the game. It was kind of given I should have been pretty lost in this position earlier on. I wasn't too stressed to be down the pawn. I was kind of fighting throughout. Getting the tempo, push with h5, and then the rook goes back, defending the pawn that I'm attacking with the knight. Again, my king's really cramped and he's threatening to come over with the rook. It would be a rook trade, but if I can keep more pieces on the board and apply some pressure, I'd feel happier about that. given that his pawn is a double G pawn, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a 2 telling of an advantage currently. But if I can try and win a pawn back, that's definitely what I'm aiming to do. So I play G6, kind of twofold, protect that H5 pawn, give me a bit of a pawn chain, stop this from moving down the board, and give my king some space to breathe. Now C4, I didn't think was a great move. Yes, he attacks my knight and gains a tempo on it, but this D4 pawn now is going to be really difficult for him to hang on to. As soon as I move my knight kind of anywhere, well, probably apart from this square, like if I go back here or here, this D4 pawn is going to be attacked twice, so it can't be, even if he defends it once, it's going to be lost. And even if he pushes it forward, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, plus the knight, 4 attackers on it, and it's going to be defended twice. So I was kind of really happy to see that I'll be picking up a pawn. So we'll go back level on material, and actually he's going to have some double pawns and a split pawn structure, which could actually start to swing the advantage into my direction. The main plus in his advantage is this bishop, which kind of pierces and can attack it across these major diagonals. So I drop back to e7, gives me the option of going up to f5 if I need it, protected by the king, and stops him from gaining any tempos with like c5 over there, and forcing my knight to an unfavourable square. Rook over to f3, and again I've got the option like, do I want to block with my knight? Probably not for the rook coming over. So I was like, let's just take this opportunity to get off these checking lanes. I've got to be careful of like pawn pushing and the rook coming in here, but I've got time to sort myself out in those lines. So feeling a bit better now. I've made a little cushion for my king. This pawn is going to fall pretty soon. Going to get back level on material. I've just got to be careful about any infiltrations down to the 7th, and then I think I'm starting to sort my problems out. So place c5, ready to come in and infiltrate. So the first candidate move and the kind of sensible move is knight f5. Attack this pawn a load of times to win it, put a bit of a blocker on it, and there's no g4 to undermine it. So knight f5, a sensible move. And then, yeah, I thought regardless this pawn is falling, and then bishop e6 was interesting. And I was trying to think how I wanted to counter it. I could either pick up the pawn, but then after this line I drop it again. So the other line is taking with the knight, which is interesting. And I can kind of see if I take the pawn here, when I take the rook, it's coming with check. So this is a kind of a big plus to going this way. So if I take the pawn, I'll be up a pawn, down a rook, but gain the rook back with check. So I'm up a pawn so far in that line. Because it's check, he's forced to take my knight back, and then I pick up the bishop. So I was thinking in that line, I get the pawn, we trade off all the material, we'll just be left with king, rook, and pawns. We'll be level on pawns, and he'll have doubled f pawns. So I thought that's the line and the way to go, and that's kind of what happens. So we take on d4, he takes the rook, we take the rook check. He's then, because he's in check, so he doesn't lose the rook, he's forced to take back. If he had some lines like this, we'd be in a bit more trouble, but because it's check, that really helps. So he takes back, and we take there. And actually, the way it works out in the end with my bishop coming to the 7th, that's super helpful that there's no bishop down to the 7th at the end of the line to try and check and pick up a pawn. So now, rather than being worse, I think I'm definitely better now in this position. Black's got doubled f pawns and split pawns over on this side, whereas I've got 2 cleaner pawn islands, which we can hope to look at, and there's some clear ways that I can get down and attack 2 pawns at once. So he brings his king up. The main thing I want to do is go up here and attack the pawns, but I'm worried about his rook coming down to e7, so I've got to protect against that. So I just slide my king over first. Didn't really understand rook e4. Maybe he's coming over here to check, but it's not doing a lot. I thought maybe rook down to here made a bit more sense on e5. Although again, I'd have probably played d5 regardless, and at any trade it gives me a passer. So e4 didn't really get. Allows me to play my rook up to d5, attacking 2 pawns, and importantly, this one comes with check. Rook over to b4. which is a bit uncomfortable. I was like, yeah, I'll probably win these 2 pawns, but you're coming down and winning these 2 pawns. How does that position look? I didn't really want to go back and defend it. That felt a bit passive, although maybe that's the way. Yeah, because I suppose I can't go up with my king because there'll be lines like this. So I decided to go into it. I took on g5 for check. When the king moves, picked up the c5 pawn. He now comes in and picks up the b7 pawn. When I go up, he takes on a7. Now, I couldn't really tell how to evaluate this. I thought I had reasonable chances of pushing the c pawn up, but obviously I was nervous about the a pawn running away as well. So I didn't know whether to shove my rook up and then chase the pawn up, whether to get behind his pawn, whether I should be chasing things over on this side of the board of trying to move my pawns forward and king and get my rook in that way. And I had under 4 minutes to try and figure it out. So I started with rook up. It kind of forces his king back. I was like, if I can keep his king in some of these squares, that's going to be preferable. So his only move really is king dropping back to g2 or coming up to g3, but it's kind of pinned in there. So he goes to g3. I kind of had h4 as a kind of trading option, but again, I didn't know whether that was going to give me enough options. I think white could trade down to be just down a single g pawn, which would be a theoretical draw. But I thought we still got some options here, and again I had to decide, like, do I run my king over to try and protect it? Do I push this pawn up? Do I run with the c pawn? I started with g5. Well, it'll be interesting to look with the engine afterwards what the right plan is in this position, but I thought kind of stopping the king coming forward is useful. I'm not really bothered about the rook going over to h7 because I've got a check here, and it allows me to pick up his a pawn. And I think if I pick up this a pawn, his chances of winning or doing anything meaningful basically shrink down to nil. So he goes a4, and then I throw in the check. It was interesting to see which way he was going to go. I was like, if he comes forward, I've got the check, and he's going to try and get himself mated. Or if he goes here, I can start running with the pawn. And if he goes back, he's kind of penned in. So again, got his king out of the way of the action. Can leave these pawns here protected by the king. And here I decided to start bringing my king over to a8 to start covering that. I thought that was the way to go. Pick up the a4 pawn if I can and start making a run with the c pawn. Rook a8 I don't think does an awful lot. It kind of threatens to go over here, but I've got protection with the rook in any case. Oh, excuse me, apologies. Go behind the pawn now with rook a3, so any rook move I probably would take. Like I say, if I can get rid of this a pawn, I'm feeling super good about everything. He throws it forwards, and now I'll try to get my king in as close as possible, get my king inside the square so I can start pushing the c pawn. And I thought a combination of a passed c pawn and a passed h pawn is going to be quite a lot for him to deal with. Pushes a6, allows me to bring my king in a bit closer. There's no a7, we're definitely picking it up there with king b7. I'm now threatening king b6 to pick it up as well. So I was feeling pretty good about how we've played this. We've kind of closed in on this pawn. I don't think they've played it optimally. They could have put a bit more pressure, maybe trying to pick up some pawns over here or bring the king in to cause some damage. So king h3, again, I wasn't sure if that was the right move. The first thing I looked at is I can obviously pick this up with check and go here and pick this up. And if we go here, I can start running. So I thought that's a positive. I've got king here and picking up this pawn, and he's still 2 moves away from doing that. And in a lot of the lines, I'm able to pick things up. So I was feeling pretty good that I've got an advantage here. I went for the rook takes, get rid of his f pawns. I'm kind of guaranteed to win the a pawn, so kind of get rid of any option of losing this game. King goes down, and we pick up the second pawn. So feeling good. There's no f pawns now. I'm pretty much guaranteed to pick up his last a pawn, so that's good. And I should be surviving with at least 2 pawns, my h and c pawn. Yeah, rook Rook G8, not a great move. It doesn't threaten anything new. Like, if anything, it's worse than leaving it where it was, because now if king takes, you're pinned and you're losing your rook, and even if your rook takes, I'm checking you. I lose the pawn there, but after we trade rooks, I'm going to pick up this pawn, and I've got a pass C pawn, which I think I'll be able to queen. So king over to B6, definitely picking up this pawn now. Rook goes back to A8. He's just wasted two tempo at a really kind of critical time. I was able to throw in the check first, so you can't pick up the G5 pawn. And when you go away, there's no immediate threat to being able to queen this, even without my rook over here. Even if you play A7, you're not in time to move your rook anywhere meaningful. My king can always cover it, so I'm able to play with these pieces up here on their own without any kind of fear. So start with H3, threaten to get this queening, and I was kind of feeling really confident this is going to be a win. King comes down, I can just push the pawn again, threatening to queen now. So he's got to throw his rook over, which allows me to pick up the A6 pawn, but again, I'm in no rush to pick up the A6 pawn. If it pushes, I can pick it up, and the rook hasn't got anything on the 6th row to pick it up and defend it. So I'm in time to play G4, G3, and get my rook down to G1 and queen. King now comes over, and I thought, just to avoid any counterplay, play rook D2 check and force you back to where you came from. I can play G3 now, and this is a super solid, really difficult to lose position. Two connected pawns here. I'm picking up the A pawn. White's got nothing. Plays A7, which we take, and after the check, we go back. And now, yeah, it's just kind of technique. So I can whiz through this. Rook H8, not doing a lot. And kind of calculated, I can play G2 and pick up a queen here with minimal fuss. So played rook G2, rook takes. I could just queen straight away with G1 queen, but if I check first, force the king to move, I can pick up a queen here. And then he can throw some checks. He traded off his rook and a queen and a pawn up here. I was like, I'll just go get two queens and we'll ladder mate like this. And this is how we finished with the checkmate. So not a clean game. We're definitely worse and lost in some positions there, but we fought back really well to pick up the win. Thanks for watching.